books that deal with the Bible books of Joshua through 1 Samuel, and we're on lesson number 9, as you see on the board there tonight, going through Judges chapter 7 through 9. Been talking about the cycle of the book of Judges, which you could either put in that kind of a way, a little bit more in depth, I guess, a little bit more detailed, or think about it as a wave, back and forth, back and forth. You have the people for a time being faithful to God and being at rest, and then they forget about God, start to go into idolatry. God delivers them over to an oppressor. That oppressor then causes them to be afflicted. As they're afflicted, they finally turn back to God and ask for deliverance. God sends them a judge. That judge helps them. They return back, and they have peace for a little while as they do what God says, and then they go again into idolatry. That's the kind of a cycle that you have going over and over there. We've talked about those who were the judges. Began with talking about Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar in the second lesson. Then Deborah working with Barak. We started Gideon last time on Sunday, and we're going to complete that study on Gideon here, Lord willing, this evening as we look at it. Chapter 7. We have Gideon's story continue. Let me ask what takes place. I asked Leslie, she looked at those charts that I have, and I said they're kind of busy, but basically 7, 8, and 9 are kind of busy as far as things going on in those chapters. What happens in chapter 7? Okay. Who are they going to war against? Why?
They're enemies.
Okay. They're the oppressor that God sent when they went into the idolatry, the unfaithfulness that was there. So he sent the Midianites against them. And they went out, and when you look at it, it says that the 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. That was after what? What did Gideon ask them? All right, anyone that's fearful. There were more people fearful than not fearful, right? And so they returned from there, and that leaves you 10,000. What does God say about that? Still too many. So now what are we going to do? Do what? Okay. What's the test? Let's see. Who's got, he says, you tell them to go drink. And when they drink, what does God say? All right. There were 300 of them that lapped like a dog. I don't know about you, but I've been around people drinking out of the cell. I've never seen 300 that would do that. But anyway, there were there. And 300 lapped like a dog, and he said, okay, you take those, and you go and take the Midianites with that. So, what was the battle plan? You're going to get a lot of extra arrows and slings and swords. Okay, we got a pitcher that's empty, a trumpet, and a torch. You seen any other army plan that involved that by itself? Why? What's God trying to show from the start of this? Why did he say, go back if you're fearful, and then said, 10,000 is too many, gets it down to 300 to go against over 100,000 enemies?
So it will be abundantly clear that it is absolutely nothing
You have people here who are armed to the teeth when you look at it, with Midianites, the Amalekites, others who were joined in at that time, ready to destroy Israel. So they have chariots, they have everything else. And it's obvious that if you look at the two sides, there's no way that the children of Israel can win just on their own. And that's what God wanted. So now they go and they kind of make a flanking movement, some on one side, some on the other. And what does Gideon say the battle plan is? Me and my group will go on in toward the camp. And what will we do? Okay, we'll have them circled there, and when you see me, do what? Blow the trumpet. Then you blow your trumpets, you break your pitchers, and you shout out saying what? Okay. And what did that do to this group of people?
Set them all against each other.
All right. All right, they start going, they start running. As they're trying to run and flee, what does that open up? It opens up them being attacked in just about every way. That's not a problem. What gave Gideon the confidence in this plan?
He went down and heard the dream of the
Okay.
people there.
And what was the dream? There's a barley cake, and what did it do?
Tumbled into the camp,
All right.
demolished the tent.
Rolled down. Then it destroyed the tent, turned it upside down. And the other guy who was there said, I know what this dream means. And what was that? All right. The sword of Gideon's going to come in, and he will destroy us there. And after that's been said, that the sword of Gideon will destroy us, now they all shout out what? What's that guy thinking about that time? That's what he had said the dream meant. And now he hears that same phrase. That's got to be something that is involved in some of the discomfort that takes place, if you will. The absolute fear that's going on that way. Someone might say, well, I don't know that I believe all of that happening like that. Well, what do we know? What took place that we can absolutely establish? How many of them were killed from that whole thing?
20,000.
All right. Now, would that be something that could be easily faked? I mean, think about this. You're going to go out here, let's say that Joshua or somebody gives us over here. It's going to be now the next generation that's writing the book of Judges as they're going in and trying to go against these armies of the people who have no faith in God, who are absolutely opposed to Him. And they start writing down stuff like, well, there were 20,000 that were killed immediately in the battle. If that didn't happen, how easy would that be to overcome and show the fact? Not too difficult. You can't have a fake of 120,000 not being dead that were said to have died in a battle. That either happens or doesn't. Those are people that go back to their own families and everything else. If there hadn't been 120,000 that were killed, then what's going to take place? Everybody's going to say to their family, where are these guys that are missing? I don't know any that are missing. You start looking at that, and you either do or you do not have evidence of that. If they were ones who tried to write as if this happened when it didn't and fake it, this would have been one of the easiest books to have brought down and to have made to be going against everything and do the opposite effect of bringing about faith. The only way in the world this can survive and go onward is for this to be something that's seen as absolutely true. It wasn't something that the enemies were doubting at all. It's something that was provable. That's what takes place in the Scripture. The reason it has survived to the point that it has is because it's provable. Let me ask you to think about this in contrast to something. When there was the invasion into Iraq, Saddam Hussein and his minister that was there of his army and the one that was over all of the spokesman for everything, said that nothing happened. The army was repelled at the border. There was no success that it had whatsoever. Anybody seen that in a history book? You never will. Why? Easily disprovable. It was obvious. You had a whole international group of media, everybody else, who absolutely would love to have nailed the U.S. any way that they could. And some of our own journalists, I think, are much the same way. But what happened is, it was an obvious fact that that was so. That's well accepted at this point. Think about that in terms of this book is written in a time that is pretty much consistent with that period. That they've got this down and it's going to be obvious there. Okay, now after they do all that, you have this battle that is joined up here and then brought down. They are fleeing along that path, going down the Jordan Valley, then across and on going out to the east. During all of that time, you still have this group that is fleeing, that is afraid of 300 men. And they continue to do that. How do you explain that? I can't explain that in a physical sense. I can explain that by God, though, and His power to be involved in that and causing that destruction to take place. Anybody else got anything there? Chapter 7. Did we miss anything that we need to pick up?
Well, just in contrast is, not contrast, but this auditorium seats around 300 people, and we get close to that on a really full Sunday. And OU's football stadium seats 84,000. So you'd fill up that stadium and then half again that stadium.
Double.
Yeah, and then almost double, and then we go down there and run them, kill all of them, and then chase them down. It's just...
Now, the number who were involved in the total coming against them was well over that 120,000 that are killed.
Like
and
sands in the seashores.
Exactly.
It's just amazing.
That's there. All right. Anybody got anything else on that one? They take these two guys' heads off that are the princes of Gideon, and they're taking them, and they're taking them all the way across Transjordan and out here to the eastern part where they're going so that they can let everybody know what? They got them. This isn't just saying, well, we killed two of those princes. They've got their heads. They take them to people who, Midianites being out there in that area, that would have been where their origin was. They're going to know all about this and be able to confirm that. All right, Judges 8. Involved in this whole thing here is what's taking place at just about the time of the crossing over of the Jordan at Succoth and Peniel. When they have this battle in there. Gideon is involved in trying to kill the Midianite leaders all through this point. If you look at what takes place, this statement that first Gideon makes to Succoth is he chides them, rebukes them for doing what? All right, not giving food to those who are the children of Israel when they're going to benefit by this. They don't help, they don't give food, so he goes here to Penuel. How about them? They do the same thing. And what does Gideon tell them? I'll be back and you're going to regret your decision. Basically, here there are those who the thorns will be brought against your bodies, and it'll absolutely be that way. Here, I'm going to tear down the tower that's there and kill you as well. Now, that's two pretty specific ways of them being afflicted, isn't it? Does he get mixed up? And when he comes back, that happens to the opposite group? Or instead of what he had said, there's another possibility out here that happens, and what he had said would take place, that isn't really what happens? No. Every time in the Bible you see those who are given the power of God and they go into battle, not only do they win the battle when they're doing what's right for God, but there's given to be certain elements of that which produce an undoubted fact that God was with them. I mean, how likely is it to say what we're going to do is when you come back, you're going to be brought to all kinds of affliction by the thorns of the wilderness being brought and afflicting you all over, being used to just tear up your body. Is that a normal way of an army bringing a problem on people? But that's what happens.
Humiliation is what.
All right.
What they're, anytime that you can humiliate an army against you, you won the battle.
Okay. Next one in Penuel, here it is. Oh, by the way, when you think of that Penuel, that El is Elohim. Here's a people who in the past had changed the name very obviously of that place to no longer be involved in that of the Canaanites, but they had changed it to reflect the name of God. Yet here they're acting in a way that is without faith. He says, I'll tear down this tower on you. Well, what happened? That's exactly what's going to take place. We're going to talk about that in chapter 9. But when you talk about you tear that down and he's going to burn this, keep in mind that's exactly what happens. As they're going and fighting this in chapter 5 and getting these people run out of the Canaan side of the land, in other words, to the west of the Jordan, the land of promise, they get them out of there. It says, Midian was subdued before the children of Israel so that they lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. So everything's great, right? Never going to be a problem like that again, is there? Surely we've learned our lesson. And what did Gideon do? He said, I want to get for my part in this the gold from all of the earrings that were out there with what? Plunder. There we are. The loot that they took from this whole thing. I want the gold from those earrings, and they gave it to him. What did he make out of it? An ephod of gold. What could possibly go wrong with that? one, what tribe is Gideon from? Manasseh. Who had an ephod made specifically for them? The Levites, specifically who? The high priest. Who also had an ephod later on that was there as a part of an office. The king did. And it was a kingly ephod. And when he took that off, David specifically, his wife kind of chided him for doing that and becoming as one who lowered himself to get out of that kingly apparel. Is there anything said about an ephod that was supposed to be worn by Manasseh? Any other tribe? The only two that were supposed to be worn specifically noted something about one leading in a particular way as God described, and he ordered that ephod. There is nothing in the statements that God ordered this golden ephod to be made or that he would even approve of it. It's what Gideon decided to do. Now, like a lot of other things, what happens with that? Later on, okay, it becomes an idol, and they worship that, and the result is what? They stray away from God again. That ever happened before? Remember about that brass serpent that was raised up in the wilderness? That's one that God commanded them to build for a time. But what did they do after a while? They made that an idol too. They called it Nehushtan. And what did God tell them to do finally? You grind it up as dust and you throw it into the river so it won't be done again. What's the point? What's the principle? Number one, I couldn't show the authority for that ephod being made in the first place. But what else? Can I understand that there are things made repeatedly that come to be an idol to the people? I mean, how far we have to go back? Their jewelry of gold that they took out of Egypt, being a calf, two calves that are made as Aaron brings them forth. This happens over and over again. Is there anything we should learn from that? When you look and you see, well, I see where if this was allowed to go on, where it ended up as a problem. I can see that this would be misused pretty easily. What should I do? Wisdom says you stop before you ever get to that point. You don't let that develop. There's a lot of things that I look at and I notice have happened in history among God's people. And I used to be one that said, well, now it doesn't become wrong until there's some sin that's involved in that. True. But it becomes unwise at the point that I do something that is likely to go the direction that's wrong. And that lack of wisdom, once it's seen over and over and over again, what do? Say, no, I'm not going to go down that road. You talk about the use of drugs, alcohol, immodesty, dancing. You go right down the road, and I can tell you, there will be an argument. Well, you can't tell me this particular thing is wrong. Where does the Bible say not to? Is usually how that'll come about. And I'll say, you know what? I see what's happening here. When you talk to young people who are starting to develop a relationship and they're starting it in a way that is unwise, those who are older in their married times and have been through those periods, they look at it and they say, that's not a good idea what you're doing. Typically, younger couples say, oh, you're just trying to make our marriage like yours or whatever. No, I know what happens. And you might say, well, we're not like you old fuddy-duddies or whatever else. But the fact of it is, history repeats itself. And it's wise to take counsel in that sort of fashion. I knew a fellow when I was beginning to preach. This would have been in the 1980s. And I pointed out to him about the direction he was going was a direction that would end up with a faithlessness. And he says, well, what you don't realize is that some of us, or some of you may follow history, but some of us lead it. Within 20 years, he had left the faith, and within 25 years, he committed suicide. You look at things and you see those kind of repetitions taking place. And it's wise to look and see, not just, can I say this is quantifiably wrong? I need to ask, where's the next step that comes with this? And that next step and the next one and the next one, that's called wisdom. Can I say there's absolutely something sinful about it, even if I cannot? I recognize I don't try to get as close to the line of sin as I can. I try to stay far away from it. And that's how you try to act in that way. Anybody else got anything there? Go ahead. And then some.
Reading something along the same lines in Proverbs 7. For at the window of my house I've looked out through my lattice, and I've seen among the simple, and I've perceived among the youth a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness.
All right.
Is there anything necessarily wrong?
That's right.
But where's it going to lead you?
Where's it going there?
And what kind of wisdom does that show to put
Yeah.
yourself in that
Yeah.
kind of a situation?
Go ahead, Simon.
Well, and I think, too, it really lends into when we teach our children, are we just repeating the way we were raised or what we know or traditions, or are we looking at it as God would look at it and say, well, maybe I was raised this way, but this is better because this is God's direction, and not repeating family history or societal history where you grew up, and making an actual change in the teaching of children so that the next generations are better each time instead of looser and looser.
As I went through junior high and high school, I was raised in Corpus Christi, Texas, a beach town. And I can tell you right now, what I teach in modest apparel is not what I thought back then. I absolutely did not. Now, I'll tell you something. What I thought back then and what I was told back then was wrong. And I know where it led me. And I know where it led others. And I wish I had been taught the truth. Our whole family had to change from our views that we had had previously on that issue. And it was difficult to say, okay, I've been wrong for all this time. First time, I still remember when I came to understand the truth on modest dress, the next Sunday I got up in the pulpit and I apologized for, I had never taught my view, but I said, I want to teach what I've never taught before because I'm recognized I was wrong. And it was something that is awfully humiliating to do that. But the fact of it is, it was what was necessary. And we need to be ready to see where these things are a problem in our life and where they go.
Actions speak louder than words, but you need them both. I mean, if you're teaching something to your kids and not doing it, that's totally wrong and they'll see it. But if you're doing what you should do, but not studying with your kids or making sure they get their lesson, you know what I mean? In that aspect, you need both. You need the action and you need to explain to them what you're doing, why you're doing. You know, not just that we do go to worship every time the doors are open. Here's why, you know, and the importance of it. And the
It has to have the power of the teaching of God's Word. Because if it's just my ideas, that doesn't have any great power. We all got to the point where we were 13, 14, 15, everything our parents said was wrong, and we knew that. They were just stupid. Well, the point is, when we put behind that God's Word, that's the real point that's being made. There's the thing that makes that power to be present in it to begin with. All right, anybody else there? Chapter 9 then. Chapter 9, you have Abimelech come along, and who does he have killed? All right. The brothers that were there of Gideon, other than him, as a brother of a concubine, 70 of them, except he misses one. Who was that? Jotham. And Jotham goes and he escapes. And he goes down to Mount Gerizim. And he stands on the top of Mount Gerizim and he gives a fable about the trees that were going to make somebody their king and the problem that comes about as a result of all of that. And the point is, he's warning them about what Abimelech's about to do. Well, is that warning, does it have merit or a lack of merit? It has a merit that's there. And he says to them, you need to go out and oppose him. He's going to bring more and more of a problem. Ultimately, what had been told before starts to take place. They go in, and the tower where the point was made by Gideon, your people are going to be afflicted by the bringing down of this tower, and their lives will be brought to an end. The tower was brought down, so the people all went into what? A stronghold that's there. When they went into a stronghold, what happened to that stronghold? That had the fire that was brought upon it. And they died in that way. Those who were at Succoth were told that the briars would come, the thorns, and they would be afflicted. That's exactly what happened there. When Abimelech is there at Penuel, however, and he goes in, and he's going through these Midianites and trying to afflict them, he goes into a city. From the wall of the city, what does it say got dropped on him? All right, the millstone, the upper millstone. I got this to show you. Here's the lower millstone. It was what they ground against. The upper millstone is what they were able to carry. It was very heavy, but it would be something that they could carry, and they rolled it around in this circle. And when that weed or whatever is down there, then what happened as a result of that? Plus this heavy wheel over it, it would be ground, and they would get the milling done. That would take place, and you would get the flour that came out of that. And so what happens is one lady goes up there, and she gets that and throws it down on his head. Well, that's probably going to cause more problems than just a headache, isn't it? If that thing's dropped from the top of the wall, what are you going to have? Likely he's going to be one that dies from that. And that's why he recognizes, he says, I don't want to be killed by a woman, that it be said that about me. It's kind of a strange sense of priorities. I kind of prefer that I not die by that, but his worry was it being said that he was killed by a woman. So what does he tell his servant? You take the sword and you thrust me through in this way. And that's exactly what happens. And so you had various ones of the prophecies that were made, and it be pointed out that Abimelech would die. He would not be one that would survive in this sort of a way. All of it comes to be true just as Gideon had said. And pretty obviously, most of it takes place after Gideon dies, which is significant as well. Anybody else got anything there? Okay, let's look at a few questions then. Anybody got one they had a question about? Okay, well, let's try number 2. How did those chosen to be with Gideon drink water? All right, they lapped like a dog. Where does it say that? 7:5, okay. 5, with what did Gideon teach the men of Succoth? Thorns and briars of the wilderness, chapter 8, verse 16. What manner of men, number 6, what manner of men did Zebah and Zalmunna slay at Tabor?
Those that resemble the king.
Okay, those that resembled or looked to be like that they were children of the king, chapter 8, verse 18. Number 9, where did the wood come from with which the people in the tower of Shechem were burned? Okay, how did it come from there? What'd they do? All right, they chopped it down, got the bough of the tree, carried it over there, put them up against the tower, lit them, and what happens? Now they got their Aggie bonfire, and that's exactly what happens. You have that tower being burned down. Let's try this next section. Number 3, the men of Ephraim did chide with Gideon because he did not call them to fight against. Okay, what did Gideon say to them?
You killed the princes.
All right, you've done all of this work. I didn't think it's fair to call you out of here when you had done so much. Is there a little wisdom in that? It's true, but it's giving them a compliment about the things that they had done. Go ahead, Tyler.
I had a question, the first question you asked, I think I've always wondered this, but when it's talking about the people who he chose, the 300, it compares them to the dog that laps and those that get down on the knees. And it says, in verse 5, everyone who laps in the water with his tongue, his dog laps, you shall set them apart. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lap, their hand to their mouth was 300 men.
Yeah.
I've never seen a dog use its paw, so I was trying to figure out, because I've always pictured this as them actually putting their head in the water to show that, they're not aware of their surroundings or whatever. But then it always says their hand to their mouth. Are they lapping it out of their mouth like a dog, or out of their hand?
There's a question on that. That's one of the ways that it's sometimes seen, is they're lapping it like a dog out of their hands. There's also a point there that is the translation that comes through the Hebrew form. If you go to the Septuagint, the Septuagint has the same thing there. Those that lap like a dog, meaning they take their tongue down to the water. And I think that's the explanation for it. For whatever reason, there was a textual variant that came in that. Here's something interesting. When you look at the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew text of the Old Testament, to look at that text, the oldest we can go back is about 800 A.D. And that's only a partial. When you had all of the texts come in the Septuagint, or in Greek, at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you go back over 2,000 years, or in some cases almost 2,000 years. Here you had this, and it seems to me pretty obvious. Somewhere there had been a change in the text to read like that. I don't know why. It could be that that's the way they called dogs lapping. I don't know. But the original text seems pretty obvious to have been the same, or there's no way in the world it could have had that about 1,800 years before in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's a good question. I meant to cover some of that, and I forgot to as we were going on. But there are several things like that. It's an interesting thing to read some of. You take the text back that long, and you're getting a test on it, and every time you do, what you see is that the text originally was something that's clearly a pure text. All right, anything else there? Are we out of time? Okay. All right, no more then, and we'll